Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good evening. How's everybody today? It's warm here. Always warm here in Sacramento, I tell you. Once the weather changes, you might as well say you're pretty well doomed. Because it's just going to go hotter and hotter. Look at this. I'm all crooked. Dang, you know. Hello, Jennifer Martin. As we wait for the guests to come in, my name is Charlotte, and I'll be your host for the next hour, one way or another. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team based out of Sacramento. We are 35 strong up and down the state of California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, and Hawaii. All right. And if you want to check us out, you can check us out at californiahaunts.org, or you can check out the radio show at californiahauntsradio.com. And all our videos are there. You know, all the stuff we're recording, like this show, is all there. And you can check that out. Tonight's guest is going to be really cool. I have this absolute fascination with Atlantis. And this is what this book that our guest has worked on. His name is Marco Vigato. I hope I said it correctly. You guys know how bad I am with names. Anyway, I want to thank everybody really quick who came out Saturday night to the ghost hunt. Unfortunately, it was windy, so I had to change tactics about how I handled it, because I wanted to do a lot more hands-on training than what happened out there. But because of the wind, you know, because we use real strict EVP protocols when we're out there. And because of the wind, we really couldn't even go over the EVP protocols, you know, because we had the trains going, we had the wind going, and all that going, you know. So it was just a bunch of stuff. But we did have a good time, and we did get you know, things happened, and we had we ended up dividing into, I think, 4 teams, and every team that went out, something did happen, you know, that they experienced, whether they were touched or heard footsteps or had weird feelings, or like when Karen Clark, our psychic, was walking across the cemetery, somebody saw like a mist following her. So I mean, everybody had some sort of experience out there. So if you want to check out a video about the event, check out my Facebook feed under my first and last name. Okay, check out my feed. I'm going to post on the California Haunts page too. Check out my Facebook feed, and there's about a 6-minute video on there talking about some of the stuff we did get. So, but I did learn some lessons too myself, because the SLS camera, it was cold outside too, and the the battery in the tablet didn't last very long, so I had to. Yeah, see? Yeah, Jennifer, see? So yeah, so I was disappointed with that, so I'm going to have to figure out a way to get get a more extended battery for the SLS camera, because we were picking up stuff with that too. So anyway, just check out the video, and I'm going to go ahead and post it on my Facebook, and I'm going to post it over at you know, on the California Haunts page on Facebook. Anyway, without further ado, let's get our guest on, because I'm excited to talk to him, and I believe he's in Mexico City right now, so we can talk with him. I'm really excited, so let's do this. Hello, sir.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here with you tonight.
I'm really excited to have you on. I have been fascinated with Atlantis for, gosh, only knows how long.
Great. I think it's been the same for me as well. I've been fascinated with Atlantis since as early as I can remember. And for the past 15 years, truly researching the subject through very extensive traveling and exploration around the world.
Okay, tell us a little bit about yourself, sir.
Well, I'm originally from Italy, but I've been living in Mexico for the past 6 years now. I've been always fascinated with archaeology and ancient civilizations, visiting archaeological sites on pretty much every continent and documenting particularly the evidence of ancient advanced civilizations, remnants of megalithic cultures. For the past 15 years, I've been developing a model or a theory around the possible existence of a lost ice age civilization, identical with Plato's Atlantis, and that's the thesis that I present in my latest book, The Empires of Atlantis, which just came out.
When people, oh, wrong button. Sorry, it flipped me. It flipped on me. Sorry about that. Okay, there we go. Um, sometimes it flips it right, sometimes it doesn't. Um, when we talk about Atlantis and where Atlantis is located, I mean, people have thought it. People were talking. The Bahamas. That road that's under the ocean. People thought maybe it was out there. There's people that think it's out by South America. How did you locate it?
Well, I think you have to go back to the sources. So the most famous, I would say, although by no means the only historical source of Atlantis, is Plato's account. And Plato is adamant about locating Atlantis in the mid-Atlantic Ocean. So that's what I think is the most obvious location for the lost continent, or at least it's the only one that fits with all the information, all the hints provided by the esoteric tradition, as well as the scientific evidence for Atlantis. When Plato spoke about Atlantis in the 4th century BC, he described a sizable mid-Atlantic landmass that was located, as Plato states, outside of the Pillars of Hercules, which was an ancient name for the Straits of Gibraltar. So there is no doubt that Atlantis was actually located, at least according to Plato, in the mid-Atlantic Ocean. Now, Plato's account, we have to keep in mind, was based on even earlier Egyptian sources. Now, if we go back to some of these Egyptian sources, Egyptian documents, they also refer to a land in the west as the homeland of the gods. We also find very similar traditions in the Hindu Vedas, in the Bible as well, quite interestingly, as well as in a number of mythologies and mythical traditions from across the Atlantic Ocean, from Mesoamerica and South America, that speak of a land of the gods that sunk and was located to the east of America. So it's pretty obvious if you combine this evidence from the old world pointing to a location west of Europe, west of Africa, and from the Americas, pointing to a location to the east of America, that land, that homeland of the gods, must have been located in the mid-Atlantic Ocean.
So, were you able to go out to the location at all?
Well, there are a number of hypotheses. You also have to keep in mind that throughout the course of its history, that spanned thousands, if not tens of thousands of years, even the shape of the landmass or continent of Atlantis changed a number of times. So Atlantis probably had its largest landmass around 2 million years ago, and then sunk in stages up until quite recently. What is suggested in the book is that some of the last remnants of Atlantis, still above water, which may be identified with Plato's Atlantis, still survived above water in the region of the mid-Atlantic ridge up until certainly after the end of the last ice age. We're talking about a time approximately 11,000 years ago, and possibly also as late as the European Bronze Age, around 3,000 years ago. Now, if you also look at some of the most likely or the most likely possible location for Atlantis in the Azores Plateau, you can also see that some of the highest mountains of Atlantis are still above water today, and they form the archipelago of the Azores. So that's probably one of the last remnants, if not the last remnant of Atlantis, still above water.
It makes sense. It's like the Hawaiian Islands because I mean, the majority of the landmass for Hawaii is underwater, but because what essentially these islands are the mountaintops.
Yeah, so it was certainly a process of subsidence that occurred in stages. This is also the model that I propose in the book. It was not a single event that occurred in a single day and night, but it was a very lengthy process that spanned several tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years, that led to the sinking of Atlantis. Throughout major episodes of subsidence, of sinking, the latest occurred around 35,000 years BC, and then there was another one around 11,000 BC, which was the major episode, one of the largest, and also the one that was memorialized in Plato's account. Also, if you look at the submerged topography of the Atlantic Ocean, what you will find is actually a massive submerged mountain chain, which is called the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. If you were to imagine for a moment of draining the Atlantic Ocean of all of its water, what you would see is this immense mountain chain stretching almost from pole to pole with heights comparable to the Himalayas. And there is evidence that at some point a large portion of that mountain chain, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, was entirely subaerial, meaning it was above water. There is very significant geological evidence of the formation of rock that now forms part of the ocean seafloor of the Mid-Atlantic Ocean in subaerial condition. So even from a scientific and geological point of view, there is very strong evidence that a sizable landmass sunk in the Mid-Atlantic Ocean within relatively recent geological times.
When we talk about sinking, what are we talking about? I mean, is it from volcanoes or flooding that would have
Well,
caused sinking?
it's the majority of that would have been because of what are called isostatic pressures in
Okay,
geological terms.
okay.
Basically, what that means, if you imagine like continents or like continental landmasses to be in a way floating above the mantle, like
Hmm.
these layers below the Earth's crust, which are partially molten. Then you have these continental plates that are subject to vertical movements. They can rise and sink in the mantle. There are a number of examples also from the polar regions, for instance, where it can be shown that the weight of the polar ice caps is actually pushing the continental plates much deeper into the mantle. So the process that I suggest has been described actually by a number of geologists for the sinking of Atlantis. Actually suggests that Atlantis was essentially a basalt continent. So the
Okay.
geological composition of Atlantis was basalt. This basalt was erupted originally by volcanoes. It formed a large tectonic plate, and as this tectonic plate started cooling, like the molten basalt that formed this tectonic plate started cooling, it also became denser and heavier, so it started sinking in the molten mantle below, which is what caused in the end the subsidence. And this is a process that continues to this day in the mid-Atlantic Ocean, so it did not stop. Now, because of various cataclysms that they also describe in the book, most recently around the end of the last ice age, what they suggest was a cometary impact from a large celestial body. This
Okay.
process, which was usual or tended to be quite gradual, had a very significant acceleration. So the landmass of Atlantis may have been sinking a few inches or a few centimeters per year throughout much of its history, but at times the sinking, the subsidence might have been catastrophic by
Hmm.
hundreds of meters within a relatively short time period of just days, weeks, or months, triggered by these massive terrestrial upheavals like a cosmic impact from a comet or another impactor. Now, you also have to add to these the global increase in sea levels after the end of the last ice age. It
Hmm.
is now a well-known fact that after about the end of the Younger Dryas, or about 13,000 years ago, so between over the last 10,000 years, let's say, global sea levels rose by an estimated 130 meters worldwide, which is approximately 380, 390 feet. So you can only imagine how much landmass was lost because of a global rise in sea levels.
So, if I'm understanding this right, this took millions of years for it to sink. So it wasn't like something like a volcano exploding like Mount Vesuvius and taking everybody out. It was more of a gradual thing.
Yes, it was a very large landmass. So you have to imagine that when Atlantis had its largest extension, it was a huge landmass that stretched across much of the mid-Atlantic Ocean. So, and it was essentially a volcanic landmass. Still to this day, in the region of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, there are hundreds of active volcanoes. The Azores themselves are mostly volcanic islands. So it was a place of very intense seismic and volcanic activity that, of course, at point would have caused a catastrophic volcanic eruption and episodes of massive sinking and subsidence of land in the Atlantic Ocean.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. It's just like even now when you think about the land masses, even the United States or Great Britain or whatever. I mean, Hawaii is gaining land because of
Mm-hmm.
because of the volcanoes, but then again, there's areas where the soil is just dropping off into the ocean,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so gradual nobody really notices it. But who knows in a couple million years if California, if parts of California aren't going to be on the coast,
Right, and it's an inherently unstable um, process. So these geological structures,
Mhm.
particularly these basalt structures, they're inherently unstable. So you really have to picture them as almost like some huge rafts that are literally floating on this ocean of molten magma, which is the Earth's mantle, like the lower layers of the Earth's crust, and so they can like rise and sink, very often even by hundreds of meters, or even kilometers at times, over relatively short periods of time. Particularly if this is triggered by cataclysmic events. So just imagine what would have been the consequence or the forces released by a cometary impact, like the impact of a massive celestial body in the same region of the mid-Atlantic Ocean. They could have triggered really catastrophic episodes of subsidence. And by the way, whereas certain parts of the Earth's crust, like the region around the mid-Atlantic ridge where I situate Atlantis sunk, there were other parts of the Earth's crust that rose from the depths of the sea, which is the case with much of the Andes Mountains of South America, which show um, evidence of an equally dramatic and sudden uplift that seems to have occurred within the recent geological period. There is even evidence in some portions of the Andes Mountains of South America of an uplift of over 4,000 meters at places that may have occurred after humans were already present in the American continent. So, whereas certain parts of the Earth's crust sunk in the ocean, others were uplifted and raised with the creation of these huge mountain chains. So that the face of our planet was radically changed as a consequence of all these cataclysmic events since the last ice age, basically.
I've seen documentaries about that, where where archaeologists at anthropologists will show you where the water levels were
Mhm.
because there's bones of fish ingrained in the sides of these mountains, so they can track just how high the
Yep.
water was. It's fascinating. It's
Well,
fascinating when you think about it.
yeah, well, it's always a mix of both of two things, right? So when you find like marine organisms fossilized in what are today like dry land, what is today dry land, or in the interior of continents, you have to wonder as to whether that was because sea levels were higher in
Mhm.
ancient times, or because of all these geological uplifts and movements. So we know, for instance, the many mountainous regions of our planet, including the Alps, the Himalayas, the Andes of South America, were formerly underwater. They were part of the seafloor and
Mhm.
were raised to their present elevation formation because of geological and tectonic movements. So that basically like raised that ancient seafloor. And by dating some of these fossil organisms, they're still entrapped or embedded in the rocks. It's also possible to date in a way the time when these geological upheavals occurred.
And I think what people don't really realize, because when we're standing in what I call quiet zones, like my house is on a quiet area, my neighbor's house is on the plate, because if there's any kind of earthquake or anything minor or anything like that, their house shakes, mine doesn't, which is good for me. They'll drop
Not
off.
for your neighbors.
Yeah, not for my neighbors. So what people don't really realize is how active the
Mhm.
Earth is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we live on a very active planet, and the fact that we live right now at a time of relative geological stability, like we have never witnessed, at least not in our
Right.
lifetimes or in that of our ancestors, any geological upheaval of the scale of the magnitude of these ancient cataclysms. But that doesn't mean that these cataclysm and upheavals did not occur in
Right.
ancient times. There is plenty of evidence of that. And more recently, also within scientific academic circles, the theory of the Younger Dryas impact, or what has become known as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, has gained much broader acceptance. It's the idea that as recently as 13,000 years ago, or 11,000 years BCE, a massive comet impacted our planet, causing worldwide devastation, mass extinctions on a scale that our planet probably not seen since the extinction of the dinosaurs over 60 million years ago.
If you get something like let's talk about a big asteroid, or and I know you see this stuff in sci-fi movies all the time, but we're talking about comets impacting with the Earth and
Mhm.
stuff. Is that enough of a hit if it's big enough to knock the Earth off its axis to cause these changes?
Well, that's a significant possibility. Actually, it is suggested not only by the geological evidence that shows like a reversal, for instance, in the magnetism of certain rocks. But it's also suggesting several mythical and historical traditions from around the world. So there is this idea, also in the esoteric tradition, that in former times, during the Golden Age, the Earth spun perfectly upright. So the Earth's axis was perfectly perpendicular, and it was only as a consequence of some massive cataclysm that it achieved its present tilt of around 23 degrees. There is also the suggestion by, for instance, the likes of Charles Hapgood, number of scientists that have studied the the movements of the Earth's crust, that the position of the Earth's poles was also displaced several times, actually just throughout the last 1 or 2 million years, as a consequence of a variety of causes, really, but certainly a cosmic impact would have been one of those likely causes capable of triggering a pole shift.
Well, I was just thinking too. People, like I said earlier, people don't realize how active stuff underneath us is. Where it hit me really hard. I mean, I've been up to the San Andreas fault line, and I've seen the earthquake monitors and all that they have out there. But what hit me hard was going to Mount Lassen here in California, and they have because that thing blew its top in like 1910, and they actually have a display at the summit of the mountain. They actually have a little place that you can go into to check all this out. And the creepy thing about it all is that they have a seismograph up there, and there's one road going in and one going out. So your thought is, if something goes wrong, there's no place to go. But they had back then they had this photographer that took black and white photos. So
Mhm.
they blew these photos up to life size, and they had them on murals on the walls. So when you're walking through there, it's a surreal feeling, because even though they're black and white, you see the devastation that this thing was causing during the stages when it blew. And then the first thing you think of is, oh my God, I'm on top of this mountain. There's no place to go if this thing goes again.
Yeah.
So you can pretty much imagine what they went through, like even Mount Vesuvius when that went, in Pompeii.
Hmm.
It's spooky.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, when you think about the commentary impact of the scale of
Yeah.
the one that's been suggested for the end of the last ice age or the younger dryas, you have to think not only of the immediate consequences of the impact itself, which of course would have been catastrophic even with
Right.
a relatively small-sized celestial body, but that would have triggered massive earthquakes, volcanic activity throughout the world, massive tidal waves or tsunamis. They would have devastated the coastlines of continents. There is actually evidence that the dust that was produced by the impact actually obscured the sun for many centuries, actually for well over 1,000 years, creating conditions very similar to a nuclear winter in which no crops would grow. A number of animal species, including the mammals, went extinct around that time. So these would have been really terrible conditions.
Um, Thinking about this, have they has I mean, how advanced? And I know you guys, are going on what Plato wrote. How advanced do you think the society was? Because I mean, there's a lot of stories about them being very, even having high tech stuff.
Mhm.
So how advanced do you think they were?
Well, Plato, as I said, is just one of the sources. I think
Mhm.
many authors about Atlantis they just tend to focus on Plato's account, but the reality, as I also show in the book, is that Plato is one of many different sources. And if you include also the testimony of the esoteric tradition, I think we can create a very comprehensive picture of Atlantis and of Atlantean civilization throughout its different ages. Now, even if we stick to Plato's account, Plato is clearly describing a very advanced civilization, at least by the standards of his time. When he talks about Atlantis, he talks about these immense feats of engineering and architecture. The description of the city itself, it would have been immense by any standard, even by modern standards. A city probably 3 times the size of Imperial Rome, just for a comparison, with immense canals, earthworks, ditches, to the point that Plato himself says that all these works would have appeared almost entirely fabulous. Right, so to the point that even Plato could almost not believe the scale of Atlantean construction, Atlantean engineering, as it was being described and the story was being retold to him. Now, this is what we know from Plato's account. However, if we also go back to some of the other sources, for instance, in the Hindu Vedas, which are some of the earliest religious texts that are known to men, Atlantis is also described there as a mighty, powerful civilization in the West. It's quite curiously called by the name of Atala, which was one of the 7 climates or 7 continents of the earth in the Hindu tradition, and it is described as a place of splendor that possessed immense cities. Quite curiously, the description of the capital city of Atal or Atlantis in the Hindu Vedas and in the Puranas almost exactly matches Plato's description of Atlantis as a city built in concentric rings, which is therefore called Tripura, or the Triple City in the Hindu epics. This civilization is described as a very advanced civilization that was possessed of what we would certainly consider high technology by today's standards. There are even hints that they may have possessed flying machines, aircraft,
Really?
would look like weapons of mass destruction that are also described in many of these ancient texts. And this this is something that, again, surfaces in the esoteric tradition, particularly in the Western esoteric tradition of Atlantis, since the first theosophists published accounts of life on Atlantis through a variety of sources, through like channeled sources, through different types of readings as well, that suggest that this civilization did in fact possess a very advanced science, if not also very advanced technology. And this is, by the way, what we also find at many megalithic sites, and many of these very enigmatic archaeological sites around the world that may date back to the time of Atlantis, that bear evidence of very advanced technology in the form of machining, cutting, raising immense blocks of stone, which are all feats of engineering that would be hard to replicate even with the science and technology of today. So all in all, I do think that that civilization was an advanced civilization. It was destroyed in a cataclysm at the end of the last ice age, basically reverting to a much more primitive status, as Plato also suggests. Civilization was destroyed and survivors had to begin to start all over again like children without any memory of the achievements of ages past.
Is that what you mean? Because when most of us think about Atlantis, we think about the Empire of Atlantis. Now, your book is titled "The Empires of Atlantis." Is that what you're referring to? Like all the times they had to start over, and then they would rebuild the
Yes.
empire, and then it would crash back, come down?
Yes, what the title alludes to is the fact that there were multiple Atlantean civilizations. If you think about the timeline of Atlantean civilization that spanned tens of thousands of years. So over this immense period of time, multiple Atlantean empires, multiple Atlantean civilizations rose and fall. What I identified is two or three, if you want, major cataclysms that marked Atlantean history. One around 35,000 BC, that was the first major cataclysm, after which that basically caused the downfall of the first Atlantean civilization, the first Atlantean empire. This was followed by a second Atlantean empire between, or up until the beginning of this like time period called the Younger Dryas, around 13,000 years ago. Then you have what they call the Neo-Atlantean period, which is a time after the fall of the Second Atlantean Empire, in which Atlantean civilization slowly started to rebuild itself until everything stopped on its tracks, basically around 9,600 BC, which is the time that, like the date, the year that Plato gives for the final Atlantean cataclysm, the final sinking of Atlantis.
I have a question too. If they were trading with other empires, have archaeologists been able to find traces, traces of pottery from Atlantis, or no? Because you think there'd be something over, on a nearby island or something.
Well, they were not only trading with other cultures. You have to imagine and picture Atlantean civilization as a truly global seafaring culture that established outposts and colonies in many different parts of the world. It was clearly accelerated and triggered by geological instability on the Atlantean mainland. So the continuous subsidence in the mid-Atlantic Ocean, the sinking of land that triggered mass migrations of people outside of Atlantis that will reach both the old and the new world. So you find evidence of Atlantean colonization in both the American continent, particularly in South America, as well as in Africa, in Asia. Some of the areas that I think where a large number of Atlantean monuments and structures, Neo-Atlantean monuments and structures have survived, of course, include Egypt, like the primeval Egyptian civilization, as well as South America, all these incredible megalithic structures you find in the highlands of Peru and Bolivia, I do suggest that some of these may actually date back to certainly to Neo-Atlantean times and quite possibly also to Atlantean times. Now, if you were to go further back in time, the reality is that very little of that would have survived because after the passing of so many thousands of years, it's extremely unlikely that everyday objects or pottery, say anything like that, would have survived. Particularly if we take into account the magnitude and the scale of the geological upheavals and the terrestrial cataclysm that caused the collapse of Atlantean civilization, its various empires, so that at the end of the day, what survived the test of time are those structures that were really meant to endure for thousands, if not tens of thousands of years, like the pyramids, the Great Pyramid in Egypt, particularly some of the other megalithic sites and structures around the world that also show evidence of a very advanced science and technology.
Why do you think everybody's so fascinated with Atlantis?
Well, I think in a way, Atlantis mirrors our own civilization. At its core, the story of Atlantis is the story of this mighty and wonderful empire, this great civilization that eventually became corrupt through materialism and then fell into decadence, which I think is something we can also see to a very large extent today. There is this sense of a loss of the spiritual roots of our own civilization. I'm talking particularly about Western civilization. There is this idea of a moral decadence of society in a way that certainly mirrors the fall and the decadence of Atlantis. Now, if we also go back to the root of the Atlantis story, at least as far as the Western tradition is concerned, so to Plato's account, essentially what Plato describes is the fall from an original divine or semi-divine state. The primeval Atlanteans were semi-divine beings, or they shared the inheritance in the blood of the gods, quite literally. But then they became corrupt. They started mixing with other cultures, other people. They fell into materialism. And so that's what eventually caused the downfall of Atlantis. There is also an idea of cyclical time. There are, in fact, like cycles in history, in the history of civilization, so that we go from like a golden age to silver age, bronze age, iron age, and the cycle starts over again. So I think we're also at a very similar point in the cycle of civilization as Atlantis or Atlantean civilization was over 10,000 years ago.
Doesn't that happen to a lot of societies, though, that are really advanced? I mean, look at the Romans.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a very similar process. And I think it's very arrogant from our side to pretend that our civilization is essentially immune to this cycle. If you think about many great historical civilizations, like the Romans, for instance, think about the collapse of the Mayas or the Khmer civilization in Cambodia at Angkor. You have many examples of these great and powerful civilizations that at some point they just fell into decadence and then they were no more. Of course, in some cases, there was the case of the Roman Empire. Of course, like they evolved, they became something else. Right. This is also what I suggest happened to Atlantis. Not that Atlantis vanished and Atlantean civilization disappeared overnight. It transformed, it evolved, so that in a way we are the direct descendants of that civilization. Atlantean civilization culture still continued to influence the course of human history for many thousands of years, even after the fall of Atlantis itself. So what I describe in the book is also the legacy of Atlantean civilization that lived on long after the fall of that culture. And we have, as I say, many similar examples throughout history from the Dark Ages after the fall of the Roman Empire. So in a way, we still live in a dark age that was triggered by the fall of Atlantis, and we're just now rediscovering many of or let's say like much of the same knowledge. We're making again many of the same scientific discoveries, like rediscovering in a way the same principles, the same forces, and coming out once more of this dark age.
Yeah, and when you think about it, you look back and you wonder how, like like when you talk about the different advancements that they probably had, it makes a lot of sense because I mean when you look at some of the hieroglyphics in the pyramids, there's electric light bulbs in there that are being depicted. So who knows just how how far along the people of Atlantis really were.
Well, I think that there are certainly many examples of that. Of course, some of those may be more controversial than others. I think what you're referring to is this like so-called Dendera light bulbs. There are a number of like very mysterious, very enigmatic depictions of what appears to be advanced technology. But even if we stick to the hard evidence that is quite literally written in stone, we have numerous examples from many archaeological sites, megalithic sites around the world, of the use of advanced technology and machining even. So if we just stick to the Egyptian sites, for instance, there is evidence from the Giza Plateau, from a number of sites, even to the north of Giza, a site particularly called Abu Rawash, which is located just some 10 kilometers to the north of Giza. It's a site of destroyed pyramid. Some immense machines were employed at the site. There is one particular stone block from Abu Rawash that shows evidence that the stone was cut with a circular saw with a diameter of over 7 meters, over 23 feet. So you have to imagine they must have employed immense machines for like cutting the stone. And all of this is quite literally written in stone. There is evidence also at Giza of drilling some boreholes that were drilled into stones as hard as granite or basalt at speeds that can be measured by analyzing by looking at the grooves that were left on the stone by the drill at speeds hundreds of times faster than even the best machines, the best drills of today. There is evidence that if you look, for instance, at some of the statues that we find at many Egyptian temples, which I also suggest were probably reused in a later time. So many of these objects, many of these stones were found by later dynasties, by later generations. They were reused. But if you look at how they were created, there is no way this could have been created with a sort of simple tools like copper chisels, stone hammers, that archaeologists suggest. The creation of these artifacts would have certainly required very sophisticated equipment. In many cases, there is evidence that machines were used. And of course, like many people would ask, well, if that's the case, where are all these machines, right? Well, the reality is that we have to think that after a passing of thousands of years, all of these would have essentially disappeared. So the most valuable parts would have been scrapped away or reused. The less valuable parts would have most likely eroded away. Well, in some cases, we may even find like pieces, but it would be so difficult to reconstruct even to what they belong. And it's a very funny thing in the field of archaeology. Whenever archaeologists find some objects, some artifacts they cannot explain, they just explain them away as ritual objects, right? So there is this idea, it's almost a running joke, that everything you cannot explain is just a ritual object. And so we have to wonder how many of these actually technological objects they're still preserved in museums around the world, just being like mislabeled, miscategorized.
My brother was an anthropology major. I mean, an archaeology major. So we would have these long conversations about this stuff. And what would always strike me is the construction that was used, like in Greece.
Hmm.
You know, with the pillars and everything. It's fascinating construction.
Hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And but I mean, I don't want to downplay the achievements of
Sure.
ancient civilization,
Yeah,
because of
sure.
course, if you look at the incredible achievements of pharaonic Egypt, of Greece and Rome, there are some incredible technological and scientific achievements there.
Hmm.
Or just think of the Antikythera mechanism, for instance. So these people are very sophisticated, for sure. But I think when you look at sites like the Great Pyramid, for instance, the level of science, the level of technology that these sites suggest is entirely incompatible with our accepted paradigm of history. It
Right.
really suggests that the people that created these monuments not only possessed a very advanced technology, but also very advanced science. It's not only the technology side, so how the stones were cut, they were raised. We're very often talking about stones that weigh tens, if not hundreds of tons,
Yes.
many of these sites, but also the precision of that construction. I think about the Great Pyramid, for instance, the mathematical precision, the mathematical constants that were also embedded in the construction that suggest that the people that created these monuments possessed a very advanced knowledge of mathematics, of astronomy. They had a very accurate knowledge of the fundamental measurements of the Earth that they incorporated in the basic measurements of their monuments. And all of these cannot have just been the result of chance experimentation. It certainly suggests a very long period of cultural development, probably thousands of years, in order to develop a level of scientific knowledge, which is honestly comparable, if not even superior in many respects, to our own. That really suggests an extremely long period of cultural development, which there is simply no trace in the archaeological record. And this is why I suggest this civilization was brought there from somewhere else. So when we find all these great monuments, like we see in Egypt, in South America, there is no period of evolution. All these great structures and monuments, they just appear as if out of nowhere,
Right.
as if to almost suggest that that culture, that civilization was brought there already fully developed from somewhere else. And when we ask ourselves, so well, where was or what was that somewhere else? Then I think that the answer is certainly Atlantis.
Which brings me to my next question. Isn't I remember hearing this, and if I'm wrong, correct me. There's an island off of Greece
Hmm.
where they worship. What was it? It wasn't the cow, but it was a bull, or something
Yeah,
like.
on Crete.
Yeah, Crete. Yeah, out there.
Hmm.
And I know there's some archaeologists that believe that maybe some of those people were the ones that had started stuff like Atlantis. There's kind of a connection there.
Yeah, you're probably talking about Santorini. Well, this is one of the different theories that people from time to time come up with, trying to locate Atlantis in different locations
Mm.
around the world, ignoring not only Plato's account, but
Right.
dozens of other like traditions that very firmly situate Atlantis in the Mid-Atlantic Ocean. Now, the question about Minoan civilization of ancient
Hmm.
Crete and Santorini Island is certainly an interesting one, because that culture existed around 900 years before the time of Plato. Now, the time of the Minoan eruption has been well. It's still a matter of some controversy in academic circles, but it's been like dated to around 1600 BC. And it certainly like echoes in many ways the cataclysm that destroyed Atlantis, in the sense that it destroyed a very powerful and prosperous island civilization
Right.
on Crete, on Santorini, with this massive cataclysm, this massive volcanic eruption. But I think that's only as far as you can take the comparison with the Atlantis story, because pretty much no other detail in the story matches. When Plato talks about Atlantis, he's talking about a civilization that existed over 9,000 years before his time, which is very different from just 900 years. He's talking about a massive landmass as big as Asia and Africa put together, so not certainly a tiny island of Santorini. He's talking about essentially a colonial empire that spread to both sides of the Atlantic. So I do think definitely like Minoan civilization is fascinating, and in many ways we can also consider Minoan civilization, as many of the other Mediterranean cultures that existed at the time, as inheritors in a way, or descendants of Atlantis. But I think these are all these theories that try to locate Atlantis in so many different locations around the world. They're just nonsense. They so clearly contradict all the evidence we have from historical account and from the esoteric tradition.
Now, we talk, when people think about Atlantis, that's what they think of as Plato. But like you said earlier, there's other historic accounts of it. And do those historic accounts jive with what Plato had?
Well, now if you just read Plato's account, Plato never claimed to have invented the Atlantis story. What Plato says is that the story of Atlantis was told to his grandfather Solon by the Egyptian priests of Heliopolis and Sais, which were two ancient cities in Egypt. Now, unfortunately, both Heliopolis and Sais are now piles of rubble. So it will be very difficult to trace exactly what sources, what documents Solon had access to. But we have truly exceptional Egyptian source from a temple in Upper Egypt. It's the temple of Edfu, where there are literally thousands of pages of hieroglyphic texts covering the walls of the temple. A section of these is what Egyptologists have called the Edfu building text, and they tell a story that is remarkably similar to that of Plato's Atlantis, to the point that many researchers think that this was actually, if not the basis of Plato's Atlantis story itself, at least a very similar account to the one that Plato or Solon may have had access to. And what this story tells is the destruction, is that of the destruction of the primeval homeland of the gods. It talks about an early primeval age in which the gods reigned from an island, and how this island was later destroyed by an enemy described quite interestingly as a snake, again evoking the idea of comets or celestial impacts, since snakes or serpents were usually and traditionally associated with comets because of their tail.
Right.
And then this set of texts also describe how survivors from these civilization scattered around the world, establishing outposts and colonies, and effectively becoming the founders of Egyptian civilization. Thousands of years before, we actually have documents like the Turin Papyrus or Manetho's King List, that these are authentic Egyptian documents that include very extensive dynastic lists that stretch back thousands or tens of thousands of years. So if you look at the Turin's Papyrus, for instance, it talks about pre-dynastic kings that ruled over Egypt 30,000 years ago. So there is a very clear tradition among many of these ancient cultures, from Egypt to Babylon to Mesoamerica, that their civilization was much, much older. Their history stretched back into very remote prehistory, tens of thousands of years ago, and that various dynasties of gods, demigods, preceded the purely human rulers of the historical period. So there is this idea of a superior civilization of very remote antiquity that basically gave rise to their own cultures and civilizations of the historical period.
Well, like you say, it makes sense though because the Egyptians built the pyramids, and then you had the Mayan pyramids being built in South America, and it makes a lot of sense that they did scatter, and that's where you
Mhm.
get similar pyramids built over in South America as you have over in Egypt.
Well, this is part of a legacy, right? So, with particularly when you look at the worldwide diffusion of pyramids, what you have to think is that all these cultures were, in a certain sense, descendants of Atlantis. So they preserved a portion of
Mhm.
the Atlantean tradition. They perpetuated, in a way, much of the science and culture of Atlantis. This is not to say that all these pyramids are contemporaneous. Actually, the evidence shows that, for instance, even if we stick to the like most of like commonly accepted dating of many of these structures. In the case of
Mhm.
the Egyptian pyramids, the Great Pyramid age was around 4,500 years ago, whereas in the case of the Maya pyramids, they were built from around the 2000 up to as recently as 500, 600 years ago. So there is actually limited overlap between these cultures, so that the most likely explanation as to why we find very similar symbols, very similar architectural forms like that of the pyramid in civilizations not only so far away in space but also far away in time, is to assume that this civilization derived from a common ancestor of very remote antiquity that influenced the development of civilization on
Sure.
both sides of the Atlantic.
Well, yeah, and I agree with that 100%. I mean, obviously, at least they haven't been found. Maybe there was also a written record, in stone or whatever. Maybe that got broken up or something because these people knew how to build this stuff.
Mhm.
And if it is being passed down and passed down and passed down from generation, then maybe somewhere somebody is going to find some kind of written record.
Yeah, no, and there is in fact evidence, and this is suggested by numerous traditions of the fact that this civilization, this Atlantean civilization, was in a way aware of the cataclysm, or had at least some warning of the cataclysm that was going to happen, was going to befall them, and they took measures in order to preserve some of their civilization and
Mhm.
culture. So you have this idea of halls of records, of shelters that were created in different parts of the world to store some of the Atlantean knowledge and technology. Some of these, and this is something I suggest in the book, were certainly opened immediately after the cataclysm. That's the time during the Younger Dryas, basically between 11,000 and 9,000 BC, when you have a massive flourishing of agriculture, of technology throughout the world, which I think is linked to the rediscovery
Mhm.
of Atlantean knowledge, to an attempt to recreate Atlantean civilization in the aftermath of the cataclysm. But then there is also evidence that this great reconstruction effort was stopped on its tracks, possibly by a second cataclysm around 9600 BC. And this is what truly marks the end and the final downfall of Atlantean civilization. This, of course, leaves open the possibility that some of these ancient repositories of knowledge may still exist in different places around the world and may one day be rediscovered.
Well, when I just, to this day, even after studying up on this stuff, I just find so hard to wrap my head around that the machine thing, where it's technology that obviously we don't have. As advanced as we are here in the United States, we don't have the technology to build a massive thing like a pyramid.
Well, I wouldn't say that we don't have the technology. I think we could probably do it with the technology of today. The point is
Right.
that our model of civilization is so completely different. That when you look at these monuments, they were built for eternity. You have
Hmm.
structures like the Great Pyramid that were meant to last for thousands, if not tens of thousands of years, which is a very opposite, which is quite the opposite of our like very utilitarian architecture. There is very little in our own
Right.
civilization that would survive for centuries, and not to speak of thousands or tens of thousands of years. So many of these structures were actually created with a specific purpose in mind, and with the objective, with the idea that these would last for many thousands of years.
Absolutely fascinating. So what's next for you?
Well, there are a number of things. Right now, I've been focusing most of my research on ancient Mexico and Mesoamerica. I've been exploring numerous archaeological sites throughout the region. Uh, Also, trying to uncover more evidence of these ancient advanced civilization. I've recently created a foundation to sponsor actual archaeological research and excavations at a number of sites throughout Mesoamerica, working in partnership with academic and government authorities. So right now, we have one major project in pipeline at the archaeological site of Mitla in southeastern Mexico, which is today the state of Oaxaca, where we believe that a very extensive underground network of chambers, tunnels, and caves exists underneath the site that may date back to the end of the last ice age. This is a very interesting place that has extensive megalithic architecture, huge stone constructions built in some cases with blocks weighing in excess of 30 or 50 tons. You have numerous accounts and traditions of extensive subterraneans underneath the site. So, what our project is trying to reveal with the use of geophysical methods is the possible existence of subterranean chambers underneath the site that may date back to that very remote age, to that megalithic age when the site was built. And it's curious to think that that site was also is also the first place in the entire American continent where crops were domesticated. Pretty much all of our modern corn, gourds, squash, they were all domesticated in that very precise area around 10,000 years ago. So something must have happened there that suggests that people with very advanced knowledge, not only of agriculture, but also of monumental megalithic architecture arrived at that site. So it will be very interesting to see what we can uncover underground in Mitla. I actually invite you to visit the foundation's website. It's www.arx project.com. Maybe you can also include that. We're now looking for funding to conduct the first phase of the geophysical study of Mitla.
It's absolutely fascinating to me. I have enjoyed this hour. I've learned so much. I have loved talking to you. And I want to thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I would definitely love to have you on again some other time, to talk about your other research. But thank you.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, sir. You have a good evening, okay?
Thank you. You too. Have a good
Okay,
evening.
bye-bye.
Bye
Yeah,
bye.
bye-bye. Wow, that was really cool. I know I always say I learned a lot, but I really learned a lot because I'm a history buff, and I was taking anthropology where my brother took archaeology, so we kind of veered, right? Anyway, if you tomorrow we're going to kind of shift gears. Dr. Erica Elliott is going to be with us, and she spent time with the Navajo, and she learned some of their healing processes and learned their culture and everything. And she's kind of she's kind of an outside the box kind of doctor. When regular healing methods don't work, she'll start you off on something natural, or she'll start you off on something that like the Native Americans would use. So she's going to be on tomorrow with this usual time, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. But I know I'm going to do some more research on Atlantis after this show. But I really want to thank him. He's in Mexico City right now. That's why we went an hour early. But I thought it was a pretty cool show. The guy said a lot. The guest said a lot. If you're watching from YouTube, please subscribe. Down in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a little ghost with a magnifying glass and a Sherlock Holmes hat on. That's the subscribe button. Click on that, and we've got more than 200 videos over there. And you can just check us all out. You can look us up at California Haunts on YouTube. If you have trouble finding us, head to the website at californiahauntsradio.com. Click on a video there. That'll take you to the YouTube site. And we spent 12, 13 years over on Blog Talk Radio. So I'm now putting those archives on the California Haunts Radio website as well. So there'll be access to all that. So we've got all those shows plus these shows. And if you want to hear us via podcast, you can listen to us on Apple. You can listen to us on iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Podknobs. Almost anybody that carries a podcast carries California Haunts Radio. So you can check us out when you're driving your car. Maybe if you want to take a nap, check us out. But we just don't do shows about the paranormal. As you can see, we do shows about ancient things like Atlantis. We do shows about health. We do shows about murderers. We do criminals. I'll say criminals. We do shows about spousal abuse. So we cover a wide range of topics. So I think there's a little, if you go on the YouTube page, there's a little something in there for everybody. Okay? And if you like tonight's show, share it with 5 people. If you didn't like tonight's show, share it with 5 of your enemies. I like to say we're equal opportunity, but we want to get the word out about this show. The more word we get out, the more popular we get. Example, we've doubled our numbers from last month. So we had a huge jump. I'm hoping it's not a fluke. We'll see what happens next month. But we have doubled our numbers as far as the podcast version goes. So I'm really excited about that. I just want to get the YouTube numbers up. So if you guys could help me out with that, tell your friends and all that good stuff, that would be great. There's a ticker down at the bottom. California Haunts is a nonprofit organization. I say I own it, which I do. But everything you see comes out of my pocket, even the paranormal equipment that we go out in the field with. So if something breaks, I need help, to try and get it, because the funding's just not there. I have to thank Jennifer Martin again, because without her, wouldn't have been able to replace my headphones. So thank you. But if you could find it in your heart to donate to help us out, keep us on the air, love doing the show. I think you guys like the show too, or you wouldn't be here. That would be at paypal.me/CaliforniaHaunts. Or if you're uncomfortable with PayPal, Venmo. Go to Venmo, type in California Haunts. Boom. You can do it from there. But I really appreciate you guys, each and every one of you that listen in, all over the world. It's fun to look at the map to see where the downloads are coming from, because it's really fun to see, the people in India that are listening to us. We have people in Russia that are listening to us, people in Pakistan, people in Australia, people in Great Britain, some people in Canada, 3 Hawaiian Islands. The list is endless, and it's wonderful to see. It's fun to go in there and look at all the dots. So I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I want to thank you guys again. And again, tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, usual time, Dr. Erica Elliott will be with us to talk about natural healing, the Navajo way. So it'll be kind of fun. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and run this book once again before you, the Atlantis book, and his websites where you can check him out. And then Amazon, of course, is where you can get the book. So here we go. Websites: MarcoVigato.com, InnerTraditions.com. And the book is The Empires of Atlantis. And of course, it's available at Amazon.com. And just like that, I get to say goodbye. I will see you guys tomorrow. And I really appreciate each and every one of you. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe to the YouTube site. Okay? I appreciate it. Have a good night. See ya.